Before we get started, a quick reminder. The Crime Shack is listener-supported. If you'd like to help us keep telling these stories, you'll find the support link in the show notes or at thecrimeshack.com. The Crime Shack exists because of listeners like you. Your support makes each episode possible. Check out the link in the show notes or visit thecrimeshack.com to join our community.
The bodies of 5 children, ages 1 to 8, were found in Alabama this afternoon.
The children's father led investigators to their bodies. The crime scene is in Wilcox County off Highway 10 near Camden. Fox 10 News reporter Candace Murphy has been there gathering details about this shocking crime.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Crime Shack. This is episode 47, and I'm your host, Michelle Pense. So happy you're here with me. Now let's jump right into the episode. This episode discusses crimes against children and is not suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Divorce is supposed to be the end of a relationship. Painful, sure, but survivable. 2 adults go their separate ways, and the children are meant to be protected from the fallout. Most of the time, that's exactly what happens. But every once in a while, a separation doesn't just break a marriage, it exposes something far darker underneath. Resentment turns obsessive. Control turns desperate. When one person can't accept that it's over, the breakup doesn't just turn sour, it turns dangerous. And children stop being children. They become leverage. They become weapons. This is one of those cases. A case where a father didn't just want to hurt his ex-wife, he wanted to annihilate her entire world. What happened next wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary snap. It was calculated, methodical, and almost impossible to comprehend. 5 children trusted the person who was supposed to protect them more than anyone else on earth. And that trust was used against them in the most horrifying way imaginable. This is the story of Timothy Ray Jones Jr. and the family that paid the ultimate price when a marriage ended and something deeply broken was left behind. For purposes of this podcast, I will refer to Timothy Ray Jones Jr. as just simply Jones. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser met in Chicago in spring 2004 when they were both 19 years old. They were working together at the Chicago-based Enchanted Castle, a park similar to a Chuck E. Cheese. They dated for a few weeks when Jones started to take Amber to his Pentecostal church. The church encouraged young people in the congregation to marry quickly, so they decided to get engaged and were married within 6 weeks in June 2004. Jones was an intelligent, religious man who was working to build a successful life for himself. But Amber soon realized that his church was strict. Women were not allowed to cut their hair, and they couldn't wear pants, makeup, or jewelry. According to the church, women were to be fruitful and multiply. A woman was supposed to be subservient and listen to her husband. Jones went all in on religion. He began praying in tongues at church, then would come home and use the Bible to justify beating his children. In his mind, Proverbs 23 wasn't just a lesson, it was an instruction manual. He genuinely believed that kind of punishment was good for children because Scripture said, quote, "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. Punish them with the rod and save them from death." And even though people had warned him for years that you can't take every line of the Bible literally, he didn't listen. He would treat it like permission. After they married, the couple moved to Mississippi and lived in student housing while Jones could attend Mississippi State University. He'd be the first in his family to attend and finish college. Following a brief stint in Mississippi, Jones soon got a job offer from Intel for about $71,000 a year, located in Columbia, South Carolina. Amber was excited because she thought they could finally get a bigger house, certainly much bigger than the student housing they were living in, and prepare for a larger family. Jones wanted Amber to be a stay-at-home mom. As Amber didn't have a high school diploma, her options for even getting a job were slim, so she relied and trusted Jones' guidance. But instead of getting a house, Jones moved them into a rundown trailer in a rural, isolated area of Lexington, South Carolina. His intention was to start a homestead, so he bought dozens of chickens, 2 turkeys, 3 goats, and rabbits. As agreed upon, Amber did not get a job, but stayed at home tending to the animals. Without her own car and no family or help nearby, Amber was isolated. The couple then started their family and would have 5 children over a quick 6-year span, 2 girls and 3 boys. Mira Grace was born in 2006, followed closely by Elias in 2007, Nathan in 2008, Gabriel in 2011, and finally Abigail Elaine in 2012. With each child, their family grew louder and busier. This wasn't a household with 1 or 2 kids. This was a full house, structured around school schedules, bedtime routines, sibling dynamics, and the kind of everyday chaos that is commonplace with large families. To people on the outside, it looked like a normal suburban family, a marriage with children and stability. 5 kids in succession meant diapers overlapping with homework and toddlers growing up alongside elementary schoolers. The family was close-knit, involved, and deeply intertwined. At work, the people around Jones described him as smart, as someone who was highly intelligent, but also quiet, introverted, and even socially awkward in day-to-day interactions. His manager had stated that both him as well as other employees had no issues or concerns about Jones' mental health. Nothing at Intel suggested there was anything wrong. He was even involved in a normal community-type activity through work, volunteering with a high school robotics club where he helped students with software and building. Jones was a hands-on, involved, and devoted father. The children loved him. He was attentive and structured. He helped the children with schoolwork, attended their activities, and was often seen managing the logistics of a large household. But he was also overly strict, highly routine-driven, and controlling about schedules and behavior. He was a father who took parenting seriously, someone who wanted order, rules, and compliance in a busy home with 5 children. What stands out in hindsight is how controlled his parenting style was. He struggled with flexibility and emotional regulation. When things didn't go his way, whether with the kids or within the marriage, he became rigid, defensive, and easily angered. He wasn't warm or playful, but he exuded authority, discipline, and a need to be in charge. Amber was the more grounded parent, the emotional center of the household. She managed the routines of the children, was practical, and was deeply involved in their day-to-day care. She was the parent the kids gravitated toward, especially when they were upset or overwhelmed. She was protective without being controlling and firm when needed, but also warm and nurturing. By 2013, 6 years following the birth of their last child, Jones and Amber's marriage began deteriorating. The breakdown was driven by a combination of Jones' control issues and escalating conflicts and arguments. As the children got older, Amber became more assertive about boundaries and parenting decisions, and tensions in the home intensified. Jones grew increasingly rigid, angry, and resentful, particularly when he felt challenged or sidelined. By 2014, the situation reached a breaking point. Amber filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The separation was the culmination of years of strain, but Jones didn't process the divorce as an ending. He experienced it as a threat. What had been a troubled marriage shifted into something far more dangerous once divorce and custody became real. Because Jones had steady income, he was given temporary, full custody of the children, with Amber receiving supervised visitation. Amber was deeply uncomfortable with this arrangement, but believed it was short-term and that the court process would eventually rebalance custody. There was no finding that Jones was unfit at that point, and no official intervention that would have flagged what was to come. Amber moved out of the family home, and Jones remained in the trailer with the children, so not to disrupt the kids' school and daycare routines. Amber continued to be an active parent, including visiting with the children often, and she provided diapers, clothes, toys, and even wrote checks to Jones for things the kids needed. But in the final months of their marriage, Jones had become increasingly unhinged. In one incident, he threw a phone at Amber, knocking out her back teeth. In another, he headbutted her unconscious and spat on her in front of the children. He was drinking and using drugs and had told therapists that he had heard voices in his head. Overwhelmed and increasingly agitated with being the primary caregiver of the children, he tried to hire babysitters to help him while he was at work. According to the sitters, he kept a very tidy home and remained attentive to the children. Then he hired a babysitter, 17-year-old Crystal Bellantine, who herself had a baby daughter. They soon began a relationship, and she would attend church with Jones. But Jones' controlling issues would intervene, as he expected Crystal to adopt the ways of his church and their requirements for women. Wear long dresses, grow her hair out long, and be subservient to him. She witnessed him hitting the children pretty hard and punishing them by making them stand tippy-toe in the corner. He believed that the corporal punishment was medicine for their quote-unquote sick bodies. But Crystal finally left when Jones attempted to spank her infant daughter. After she left, another sitter, Joy Lorick, was concerned about the home's disarray. As Jones' drinking and drug use escalated, the house began to become disorderly. Trash and dirty clothes covered the floor, and there were roaches. Along with the corporal punishments, Jones would use food as a form of control. He would feed the children nothing but oatmeal all day. One day, before Joy left the home, the children asked her not to tell their dad that she gave them food because he might not feed them again. Concerned about what she was witnessing, Joy called the South Carolina Department of Social Services to report the abuse. Had those reports been taken seriously and acted upon, what happened next may not have had to happen at all. It was August 28, 2014, a typical warm and humid Thursday in Lexington. While Jones was at work, he smoked spice, or synthetic marijuana, to cope with the recent stress. By late afternoon, he headed home, smoked some more, and then started rounding up the kids. That evening, 1-year-old Abigail and 2-year-old Gabriel were at a neighbor's house, while 6-year-old Nathan, 7-year-old Elias, and 8-year-old Mira were in an after-school program. Jones picked them all up, then stopped to buy takeout before returning to the family's mobile home. Back at the house, he noticed an electrical outlet wasn't working. Agitated, he fixated on Nathan, accusing the child of messing with it. To force a confession, he made the 6-year-old do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, and 200 squats. He had him do them in sets of 10 to try to get the boy to admit what he'd done. The boy, knowing he had not touched the outlet, did not admit to anything. That evening, Amber tried calling Jones repeatedly, and one call answered around 7:12 p.m. that lasted a little over 3 minutes. It was Nathan, and he had answered his mother's call. Nathan told his mother, "It was an accident, Mommy." When Jones heard him on the phone, he became enraged and sent him to bed. Later that night, he went into Nathan's room again. Jones searched for Nathan's favorite toy, a Woody doll. He found it and ripped the doll apart. He took Nathan by the shoulders and shook him, demanding answers, and Nathan collapsed. Jones then told Elias and Mira he thought Nathan was dead, and Mira confirmed that her brother wasn't breathing. Jones began spiraling into fear about prison. He went online, searched for and downloaded a clip of a violent prison rape scene from the movie American History X and fixated on what would happen to him in prison as a labeled baby killer. But he didn't call 911 or the police. Instead, at around 2 a.m., he took Mira with him to buy cigarettes at a convenience store. On the drive back home, he claimed he heard voices telling him that he needed to kill the other children, that they'd be better off in heaven than without parents. Back at the home, Elias waited in terror next to the body of his dead brother for his father's return. The 2 youngest children were asleep. When Jones arrived home, Mira went off to bed and Jones continued to smoke more spice. He went into the living room where the kids were sleeping. He wrapped his hands around Elias' neck and strangled him. The child struggled hard against him and begged his father, crying out, "Dad, take me with you." He did the same to Mira. He then turned his attention to the 2 smallest children. Upon realizing that his hands were too big to wrap around their tiny necks, he took a belt, pulled it taut, and proceeded to strangle 2-year-old Gabriel and 1-year-old baby Abigail. Then Jones passed out from the marijuana and fell asleep. The next morning, as the marijuana was still working its way out of his system, Jones woke up in a paranoid state. The children's babysitter at the time, Christina Elke, texted him to ask if he was bringing the children. He texted her back, "Don't worry about this morning. I'll see you later this week." He gave her a call a little later and told her that he and the kids were leaving South Carolina for a fresh start. He wrapped each child's body in bed sheets and stacked them in the back seat of his Cadillac Escalade. For the next 8 days, he began driving west with the children's bodies in the vehicle, crossing state lines going through South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. He stopped for gas, he ate meals, he slept, and he bought supplies along the way. Trash bags, chemicals, goggles, a dust mask, and a jab saw, and searched online for things like extradition laws and dump sites, landfills, and campgrounds. Surveillance video caught him at several different stops, acting and behaving seemingly normal, all while carrying the physical evidence of what horrific thing he had done. Back home, the absence of the children quickly raised alarms. They weren't where they were supposed to be, and calls were going unanswered. Amber reported the children missing on Wednesday, September 3, 2014, after she couldn't reach Jones and he missed a planned exchange visit. Law enforcement immediately entered Jones and the 5 children into the National Crime Information Center database as missing persons. As Jones continued his mindless road trip, the bodies in the car began to decompose. He had to find a way to manage the odor and conceal what was in the vehicle. So he came up with a plan. On September 6th, he put the children's bodies into the bags, found a rural area near Pineapple, Alabama, and dumped them far back off a dirt road where drivers passing by couldn't see them, surrounded by scrub brush and dead trees. Later that day, Jones pulled up at a safety checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. As he approached the checkpoint, an officer could smell a strong odor of burnt marijuana and garbage coming from the vehicle. He also noticed Jones was acting strange or disoriented, and that his eyes were red and glassy and his speech was slurred. When deputies ran his plate and vehicle information, dispatch got a hit that Jones and the children were listed as missing in the national database. But the kids weren't in the vehicle, which escalated the stop immediately. The deputy asked him if he could search his vehicle, and Jones shockingly consented. The search of his car revealed bleach stains, synthetic marijuana, and paraphernalia, chemicals including muriatic acid, live maggots, and a handwritten note referencing his plans in order. Number 1, head to campground, melt bodies, saw bones to dust or small pieces, burn up bodies, dissolve and discard. And finally, day 3, the Mexican border. He was arrested on the spot for driving under the influence, possession of a controlled substance, and possession of drug paraphernalia. It wasn't long after Jones was arrested that he confessed. And on September 9, 2014, he led law enforcement to the children's bodies where they had been dumped. By that time, the children were severely decomposed and animal activity was present. What had happened on August 28th was no longer a mystery. It was a confirmed, unthinkable reality. A father had annihilated his entire family, not in a moment of panic or rage captured on a 911 call, but in silence and behind closed doors. And then he drove away and dumped the children like trash on the side of a dirt-covered rural road. Jones was indicted on 5 counts of murder. Jones pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, meaning Amber would have to sit through court and hear in excruciating detail exactly what her children endured. By the time this went to a Lexington County jury, there wasn't a mystery about whether Timothy Ray Jones Jr. had killed his 5 children. The battle was about why, and most importantly, whether he was legally responsible and sane when he did it. The state walked into court with a simple theory. This was intentional, this was knowing, and his actions afterward proved it. The defense walked in with a different theory. This was insanity, an unraveled mind, not a calculating one. The trial would run about 5 weeks total, from jury selection and testimony beginning in mid-May 2019. The state's prosecution team was led by 11th Circuit Solicitor Samuel Rick Hubbard III, with Deputy Solicitors Suzanne Mays and Sean Graham. Timothy's court-appointed defense team consisted of Boyd Young, Bill McGuire, Casey Secor, and Robert Madsen. The prosecution framed the murders as deliberate acts followed by deliberate concealment, a chain of choices that, in their view, only makes sense if the person understands reality, understands consequences, and understands the difference between right and wrong. But they didn't have to rely on theory alone. They leaned hard on Timothy's own behavior. What he did in the days that followed the killings, the driving across state lines, the disposal location. Each step that he took was presented as evidence of consciousness of guilt, not confusion. They also focused on the written plan recovered from his vehicle, handwritten notes that laid out a grotesque step-by-step disposal plan, something you don't write unless you're thinking ahead about how to avoid being caught. The defense didn't try to convince the jury that Jones wasn't the killer. Their goal was to get a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, which meant asking the jury to find that, at the moment of the killings, mental disease or defect so overwhelmed Jones that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of what he was doing. The state started with witnesses who could anchor the children in real life, testify to their routines, schedules, and places they were supposed to be. They used a Boys and Girls Club witness to establish that the 3 oldest children were in a documented routine and to authenticate surveillance video connected to their pickup. One of the most important prosecution witnesses was former babysitter Christina Elke. She was the last person to speak with Timothy and testified that he told her that he and the kids were leaving for a, quote, fresh start. The children's school teachers were brought to testify. Teachers Jonathan Stone and Amy Shearer described concerns about Nathan, that he wasn't getting enough to eat, and the bruising that they observed. Shearer testified that Nathan told her his dad choked him and slammed him against a wall, which she immediately stated that she reported to South Carolina's Department of Social Services, or DSS. She confirmed that the caseworker came to photograph the injuries. Sherry Henry, a former Lexington County DSS caseworker, was then brought in, where she laid out multiple DSS cases and the existence of safety plans that were put in place for the children. She testified that Jones agreed in May and August 2014 that he would not use physical force or wrestle with the children, and that he understood those agreements. She also described DSS's response to the school bruising report and the photos that were taken, and also described Jones' explanation of pulling Nathan up by the collar and spanking him. The state wanted the jury to see that there had been warning signs and that those signs had been taken seriously enough to create documented intervention, whether it worked or not. Another babysitter, Joy Lorick, described the punishment and discipline she observed, including Jones' belt use on the children during a trip and the fact that she also called DSS to report the abuse. One of the major prosecution witnesses was Eric Johnson, a retired Mississippi Bureau of Investigation investigator. He testified about Jones' demeanor while in custody and what he said, including that he referenced hearing voices. Johnson testified that Jones admitted strangling the children and also described how he led authorities to where the bodies were discarded off an old dirt road in Alabama. Lieutenant Travis Presley from Kirkland Correctional Institution also testified that while being booked, Jones voluntarily confessed details, including admissions about choking at least 2 of the children. Then the state brought in the science. Forensic pathologist Dr. Patricia Ross addressed the medical findings and the homicide determination, specifically describing Nathan's cause of death as homicidal violence, while also explaining the limitations created by decomposition. The state then added something juries take very seriously: the digital footprint. Mike Phipps, a forensic examiner with the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, meticulously reviewed internet search evidence recovered in the case, including searches that Jones made, such as child killed by electrical outlet, as well as searches about schizophrenia. And because Jones pled not guilty by reason of insanity, the state had to offer a counter to that. They stated that he was faking. That's where Dr. Kimberly Cruz, a neuropsychologist, came in. She concluded that testing supported a finding of malingering, which means that Jones' symptoms were exaggerated or manufactured. Even if he had issues, even if he used drugs, even if he claimed he heard voices, he still knew what he was doing, and he still knew it was wrong. Then the state called their primary witness to the stand, Amber Jones Kaiser. It's horrifying to see a mother in a courtroom having to testify against the father of her children who brutally, savagely took her 5 children from her. It's an image that I probably won't ever forget. The prosecution, as gently as they could, asked Amber about her life with the children. They asked her tough questions, like why Jones had primary custody, how often she saw the children, and what she witnessed during their marriage. Her testimony was raw. It was painful. She cried almost entirely throughout the short time she was on the stand, and at one point she was given a copy of a letter that she'd written to her daughter, Mira, apologizing to her because she felt responsible for breaking up the family and causing her daughter pain. As Amber began to read the letter aloud in court, she just couldn't take it anymore.
Mira, my sweet, sweet daughter. I know that your heart feels heavy and that you feel really sad sometimes. I want to reassure you, sweetheart, that you, along with your brothers and sister, mean everything to me. You kids are my world, and Mommy and Daddy were very blessed to have you. God. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My babies, my babies.
Amber had to be assisted out of the witness box by her attorneys. She was broken. She was defeated. A mother that had lost every single one of her children in an instant. I don't think there's any heartbreak in this world that could be worse. Watching Amber being forced to go through that, being forced to go up on the stand in court and recant all that she'd lost, was devastating. All because Jones did not take full responsibility for what he did. As she testified, Jones sat there in court stone-faced, zero emotion. It was disgusting and infuriating at the same time. But the state didn't call her for emotion purposes alone. Her testimony helped establish the expectations, the communication patterns, the children's schedules, and Jones' behavior leading up to the incident. The jury was left with the state's intended conclusion. Not just that Jones did it, but that he did it in a way that showed awareness, concealment, and responsibility. The defense needed the jury to believe that Timothy Jones was so mentally ill at the moment of the murders that, under South Carolina law, he couldn't distinguish legal and moral right from wrong. To prove this, the majority of the defense's witnesses' purpose was to lay out a picture of genetics, trauma, brain injury, long-running symptoms, and psychosis. The defense called more than 24 witnesses over 7 days. This included friends and relatives whose job was to humanize Jones before the experts ever got there. Friends and family described him as a doting father who unraveled after the marriage collapsed. They stated that Jones ultimately turned to alcohol and drugs and wrestled with constant guilt tied to his intense religious beliefs. One of the most memorable family witnesses was Jones' father, Timothy Jones Sr., who testified for hours about his son's upbringing and family history. He said his son always seemed to teeter between genius and insanity, and that Jones was born to a mother that suffered from severe mental illness and childhood neglect. The defense also brought in testimony about the warning signs that surfaced years before the killings. April Hames, PhD, Jones' marriage therapist, testified that in his first session he talked about having a monster inside him, and he repeatedly referenced it in later sessions. She said that he asked for help with anxiety, depression, and feelings of inferiority, and she diagnosed him with major depressive disorder and an unspecified non-psychotic mental disorder. Because the prosecution mentioned that they believed Jones was faking symptoms or malingering, defense expert Dr. Sean Agarkar testified that Jones had a real mental illness, not something caused by drugs, and described a significant family history of schizophrenia. His mother had been institutionalized, and his grandmother had schizophrenia and was bipolar. In one report, he told the jury flat out he is not faking it, and also clarified he was testifying to Jones' mental state after his arrest and did not give an opinion about the exact moment of the murders. Across the board, the remainder of the defense witnesses, which included doctors and specialists, told the jury the same thing. Jones wasn't malingering, he was genuinely psychotic, with a long-standing mental illness picture that didn't neatly fit into he was high or that he was putting on a show. They pointed to deep family history of severe mental illness, and they layered that with a second major factor, a serious traumatic brain injury from a car accident as a teenager. Multiple experts described visual and measurable damage, including a skull defect and abnormalities on imaging, and explained that frontal lobe injuries can affect judgment, impulse control, personality, and cognition, and can also overlap with schizophrenia or schizoaffective type symptoms. Then the psychiatric testimony stacked on top of that. Doctors who treated him inside the prison system said that when they saw him shortly after the murders, he was clearly psychotic, not faking it, not performing. In fact, some testified he underreported symptoms and that what they observed didn't resolve the way a typical substance-induced psychosis would. The defense's point was clear. Jones did in fact murder his children, but his mind was so broken in that moment that the law should not treat it as a sane, calculated act. After weeks of testimony from both sides, the case was finally placed in the jury's hands. It didn't take long for them to come to a conclusion, as they only deliberated for about 10 hours before coming to a verdict on June 4, 2019. Guilty on all 5 counts of murder. They ultimately rejected the defense's claim of insanity. Immediately afterward, the penalty phase began because the state was seeking the death penalty. During the penalty phase, the jury had to make another decision, whether or not to sentence Jones to life in prison or the death penalty. After hearing aggravating and mitigating evidence, the jury again deliberated only for a few hours and returned their decision. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. was to be sentenced to death. As he did throughout the majority of the trial, Jones showed little visible reaction. Before he was officially sentenced, Amber addressed the court one last time.
Do you want Tim put to death?
I personally, myself, can't bring myself to want anybody to die. I hear what my kids went through and what they endured. And as a mother, if I could personally rip his face off, I would. That's the mom in me. That's the mama bear in me, wanting to just make him feel everything they felt. I don't personally feel like I have the right to put anybody's life in my hands. I don't wish that upon anybody. I don't wish the Jones family to feel what I felt losing my sons. I do not wish I can't bring myself to want anybody to die. That's something that I say because I have to be okay with what I say on this stand. This is something I have to live with. He did not show my children mercy by any means, but my kids loved him. And if I'm speaking on behalf of my kids and not myself, that's what I would have to say. Nothing justifies what you've done. There's nothing you could possibly say that would justify what you've done to my babies. But they loved you. I loved you. I hope for mercy for you. I pray for you often. And I say that without excusing what he's done. I say that wholeheartedly from the depths of my soul. I don't want anyone to feel anymore. There's been so much loss.
The presiding judge, Eugene C. Griffith Jr., then formally imposed the sentence of death following the jury's recommendation.
Defendant Timothy R. Jones has been found guilty by a jury of his peers of the offense of murder. The jury has recommended that the defendant should be sentenced to death. It is therefore the judgment of the law and the sentence of the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones, Jr., be taken to the South Carolina Department of Corrections, henceforth to be kept in close and safe confinement until the 30th day of November, 2019, upon which day between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., or upon an order of execution issued by the State Supreme Court of South Carolina, the defendant, Timothy R. Jones, shall suffer death by electrocution or by lethal injection in a manner consistent and is provided for by the law of South Carolina. Signed today by me, Eugene Griffith Jr. as presiding judge, June 13, 2019.
In 2022, South Carolina temporarily halted executions due to issues obtaining lethal injection drugs. Due to this decision, Timothy Jones remains on death row. Through a civil settlement with state agencies, Amber sued the South Carolina Department of Social Services and the Lexington County Department of Social Services in 2016, alleging failures to protect the children. The case later settled for $1.5 million and was finalized on July 25, 2024. It was paid by the South Carolina Insurance Reserve Fund on behalf of those agencies, with the agencies denying liability. A jury can return a verdict, and a judge can pronounce a sentence, but none of it reaches the part that truly aches. No decision in a courtroom can give Amber her children back. No appeal, no execution date, no legal language can rewind time to the last ordinary moment when those children were still alive, still laughing, still believing they were safe with the person who was supposed to protect them. Timothy Ray Jones Jr. didn't look like a monster, but that's what made him so dangerous. He was a controlling, violent man who treated his children like possessions. When his marriage collapsed and he felt his control slipping, instead of letting go, he sought punishment. And the most devastating way to punish Amber was to take away the only thing she loved more than anything, her children. Mira, Elias, Nathan, Gabriel, Abigail. Say them slowly because they were here and they mattered and they were loved. They deserve to be more than a story we tell. If you're looking for closure, this case doesn't offer it. What it leaves behind is a mother forced to carry those small, innocent 5 lives in her memory and their 5 futures that were stolen. It leaves behind birthdays that will never come, graduations she will never see, weddings she will never get to attend. When this episode ends and you return to your life, hold your people a little closer. Notice the ordinary moments you usually rush through, because ordinary is what those children were entitled to. And remember them for what they were, children who should have had a tomorrow. That's it, friends. That was an extremely difficult episode to get through. Thank you so much for listening and for your continued support. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and head over to thecrimeshack.com to check out my new website where you can find all my episodes and more. Be sure to connect with me on social media and subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, stay safe, everyone. Every episode we make is fueled by listener support. If you'd like to help us create more, you'll find the link in the show notes or at thecrimeshack.com.